trying to establish how many churches Bible League have been able to plant, and every time we asked the question, the number proved to be higher than the last time we'd asked. But what we found when we got there is that actually the ministry is so fruitful that it's growing and growing.
Greetings and welcome to the Word in Action podcast from Bible League International. I'm your host, Michael Woolworth. Africa is home to the largest number of refugees in the world. 50 million people displaced from their homes in countries like Burundi and Somalia and posited into the UN-funded Dzaleka Refugee Camp in Malawi in Eastern Africa. My colleagues, Jennifer Macharia, Nick Catley, and Jason Lauthers, visited that camp and saw firsthand the challenges and hardships people face there. They also saw God at work through Bible League and some amazing fellow Christians to bring the hope of the gospel to that part of the world. Well, Malawi is a landlocked country of about 21 million people in East Africa's Great Rift Valley. I've been to that part of the world. You three, share about the Malawi culture, its landscape, the natural beauty, and the people as you experienced it all in your recent trip. Jason, I'll begin with you.
Yeah, Malawi is a beautiful country, and it's one of the lesser-known countries in Africa, and relatively, it has a smaller population of about 20 million people, but huge mountainous valleys, and it's best known for Lake Malawi, which has some of the most beautiful freshwater fish in the world. And the people there's a strong emphasis on community and family, and the people are incredibly welcoming. And there's a large Christian background in Malawi. Around 80% of the people of Malawi identify as Christian. Some active in their faith, some more nominal, but there's a strong Christian presence in Malawi. Yet, with that said, there's only about 10% of the Christians in Malawi actually own a Bible. Access to a Bible for a Christian in Malawi is very rare.
Jennifer, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, when I think of Malawi being an African country, there is one of the countries in Africa. Of course, they have 10 major tribes in Malawi, but the main language is actually Chichewa. But the official language of the country is English. And those who know what part of the country this is, the capital is definitely Lilongwe. And as far as the economy is concerned, maize is their cash crop. Like, that's how they make their money for the country. And as Jason mentioned, Christianity is vast in Malawi, but also, several denominations, including the major one being the Roman Catholic. Of course, we were not outside the camp, but we got familiar with this. But the other thing to note is that the traditional religion is also still being practiced, though it's only like 1% of it, meaning there are people who still follow the African cultural practices, which can impede evangelism at some point.
The one thing I most remember is just what an incredibly beautiful country it is. Where we were traveling was pretty much along the border of Mozambique, traveling through these incredible mountains. But also, as Jason and Jennifer have said, it was also a very friendly country. I mean, we were just treated so well. And although we were not sure what to expect, it was just we found it to be safe, which is not what we were told, and that was a relief.
Well, you both talked about a lot of Malawi citizens identify as Christians, some of those nominal, some of those, robust in their faith. Some follow Islam and some of the pagan beliefs and practices that are found there. Talk a little bit more about the religious environment there in Malawi.
Just as there is already a large Christian presence in Malawi, they are seeing, like many nations around the world, just the influx of Islam. Specifically, you have a large Islamic presence in Tanzania and their neighboring Mozambique, and that is coming into Malawi. And so there are certain villages that they already recognize as Islam having a stronghold on that village, and they have pastors and trained leaders, trained ministry leaders that want to go into these areas. And so there's already like certain villages are known to be Christian, certain villages are known to have and as to be Muslim.
Well, one of the interesting things is, of course, that we were in Dzaleka, which is the largest refugee camp in the world. And of course, because of that, most of the people in the camp are not from Malawi. But what was interesting within the camp is that as Bible League has been sharing its programs and resourcing the pastors, the number of churches has been growing very significantly. One of the amusing things before we went is that we were trying to establish how many churches Bible League had been able to plant, and every time we asked the question, the number proved to be higher than the last time we'd asked, and we thought there was some confusion. But what we found when we got there is that actually the ministry is so fruitful at the moment that it's growing and growing. One of the things that really struck me was that many of the people coming to the camp, and you have to understand that in many cases these are women whose, to be blunt, whose husbands had been killed, in many cases beheaded, were obviously coming in the most desperate of circumstances, wondering how they're going to look after their families, feed their children, and really feeling completely hopeless and homeless. But what we discovered is that many of them, through the work that we've been able to do there, are really finding hope. And some of them were saying that actually their sort of lifelong aspiration now is actually to stay in the camp as evangelists, which to me was remarkable. In other words, they're discovering a real passion for sharing Jesus. And this is remarkable because I'd assumed that their number one desire would actually be to find a way to return home. But they were finding something which was life-changing and wanting to share that. And so certainly the number of churches is growing very rapidly, almost by the week. And many, many, many people are coming into a relationship with Jesus through Bible League's programs.
Yeah, that's really our topic for today is what you saw at the Dzaleka refugee camp. I think one of you alluded to this, but, Africa is home to the highest number of refugees. These are people displaced from their countries. They are likely never to return in many cases. They're asylum seekers. I saw a documentary on this, may have been PBS that did it, but, they sort of showed kind of the chaotic element that was a part of this, right? In places, there's poor sanitation, there's people groups that hate each other, there have been assaults, even murders. I don't know, again, if you can attest to that, but again, a place certainly with its challenges, this UN-funded Dzaleka Refugee Camp. Before we talk about Bible League's ministry there and how the hope of the gospel is impacting people in that camp, talk about this camp, some of the people and the circumstances that you observed. Nick, I'll start with you because you were given some advice when you first arrived at the Dzaleka Refugee Camp, yes?
We were. I think when you travel to these very difficult places, you have to remember to enjoy a little humor along the way. and it was true with the people who live there. They're in desperate circumstances, and yet you still see a lot of laughter. And the sort of the story that sticks with me from the trip in some ways is that when we first arrived, we did what one normally does. We went to visit the camp director, to sort of pay our respects and formally ask for permission to go in. And it turned out that he was a wonderful gentleman called Gerald who works for the United Nations. And the first thing we noticed that when we all went in is he had a very well-used Bible on his desk, and we asked him about that, and it turned out that he was somebody who really loves Jesus, was very passionate about his job. But I asked him, do you have any advice for us as we're entering the camp? Is there anything that we need to know? And he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, I have 3 pieces of advice for you. And number 1, don't accept any food or drink from anyone because the people here will try to poison you. Number 2, don't put anything down because it will be stolen. And third, don't do anything that makes you conspicuous. And Jason and I looked at each other as the only 2 of between 50 and 60,000 people there who were white, and realized that was going to be something of a challenge. But in the event, we actually had a wonderful time. Were treated in a very friendly and respectful way, and really enjoyed our time there.
The people are definitely very gracious, and they were extremely blessed to have Bible League's presence come and visit them in their camp in Malawi. And as refugees, they know what it's like to be displaced, and so their generosity was even tenfold compared to probably what most welcomings would look like. But let me just give you some background on Dzaleka Refugee Camp. Dzaleka Refugee Camp holds around 54,000 people. Every time we'd ask, we'd hear 52, 55, but the number was always growing. And this camp started in around 1994 during the Rwandan genocide, and it's existed to this day. Now, when it was originally built, it was meant for about 10,000 people, and now today it's 54,000 people. Most of the people there are getting food from the UN. And some of that funding that was coming into the UN from the U.S. has stopped, and so they have a serious problem now with getting enough food for the people there. And other ministries, other NGOs are providing food, but the food insecurity situation is difficult. They do have wells there where people can get water, but there's no running water, very, very little resources. Of the 54,000 people, there's people there that are refugees from Burundi, from Ethiopia, from Rwanda, but the greatest number is of those from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I think between 50 and 60% was the numbers that we were given are people that are from the DRC. Congolese people. So Bible League's ministry within the camp is focused on those people that are Congolese because they are Swahili speakers, and we have Project Philip Bible studies and Bibles that we can provide for them in Swahili. And so our ministry there is working through the Congolese people.
One of the things that struck me about this particular camp, I'm used to camps having tents, like people staying in tents. So I found this very surprising that they were actually living in homes, like houses that they've built, which is something very new for me, given most people, refugees are actually found in tents. The thing that stood out for me in this particular camp was the contrast of the dire need versus the gratitude. I just couldn't comprehend how these people who have very little were so grateful and they were so welcoming, they were so hospitable. Their spirit was just amazing to me, and they were very jolly. I mean, just about everybody was smiling, the children were laughing. It just was not matching the environment they were in. I expected to find people crying, lamenting, kind of, wanting out, but that's not what I saw. I actually saw a great deal of hope. And that really, really inspired me because it changed my whole outlook of what sort of like I expected to find. And just like Jason mentioned before, some of the issues I saw there were also illiteracy. You'll find most of the women who are widows actually didn't go to school, and also the children are not going to school because there's only one school that's available at the camp, which cannot cater for all the thousands of the children that are there. The other issue is an issue of healthcare. There's only one, I would call it a dispensary, which cannot really cater for all the health issues at that particular camp. And also, as Nick stated earlier, insecurity is actually rampant. There's a lot of theft. Like you buy a bicycle, you come, you find somebody has taken. So that insecurity is definitely there. But the human spirit, for me, was very inspiring.
Well, I love that. You've really painted a picture in our minds of the Dzaleka Refugee Camp, the topic of today's Word in Action podcast. Our listeners, no doubt, are familiar with the various programs of Bible League. You've alluded to a couple of those. Project Philip, of course, we give this evangelistic and early discipleship program a face. Project Philip, the evangelist in Acts 8 who leads that Ethiopian to Christ, who then goes back and changes that continent, right? Introduces people to the hope of the gospel. Talk about some of the churches that have said, look, we've got to take the hope of the gospel into this refugee camp to introduce people to the hope of the gospel. I'll let whoever would like to take this first, but just talk about seeing Bible League at work there at the Dzaleka Refugee Camp.
Well, there are two things that really stay in my mind. The first was the children's program. We got to witness one of the children's programs, and we went into one of these Bible League churches, as you would expect, a very modest church, some kind of concrete building with a few holes in the roof, no windows. It did have some doors, but what we witnessed were a group of 10 children participating in a kind of Bible study, learning about Jesus with very passionate and enthusiastic leaders. And it was very, very exciting that the children, it's hard to imagine, but if you think that these children have almost nothing in their life. For example, I didn't see a single children's toy the entire time we were in the camp. And so for them to go to a Bible study and get their hands on a Bible was actually something quite extraordinary for them. It really is the highlight of their life, which, sounds very strange to us, but incredible excitement amongst the children. Wonderful singing and very attentive learning, and these children just were so engaged. But the interesting thing was then when we talked to the leaders afterwards about the program and about what they were doing, and what they said is that Bible League had been able to fund 100 children to go in this program. And so what they decided to do there was take 10 churches and 10 children at each of the programs and give them the opportunity to be part of the program. But whilst it was going on, we had hundreds of children surrounding the building, peering in at the windows, trying to sneak in. The leaders were actually having to keep children out, which is kind of the opposite of what we sometimes experience in Western churches. And there was just this incredible desire. And what they said to us was that although there's only 100 children involved in the program, they could have 1,000 the next week. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children on a waiting list for the program. But obviously Bible League has to allocate its resources as best as it can, and so in this case it was 100. But for me, it just speaks to an amazing opportunity that there are thousands of children waiting to learn about Jesus, and the only thing standing in the way is the funding.
Yeah. You spoke with Pastor Guerrera, right? One of these heroes of the faith. It has the grace and the gumption to take the gospel into this camp. Hear from Pastor Guerrera now.
Into our church, we have more than 100 children, but because of lack of materials, other children really, they want to be taught. Unfortunately, there are no more books or materials. So we are going to ask Bible League International if it can be possible to send us most of materials which can be helpful to our children. Thanks so much, and God bless you.
Yeah, I love, he's a polite man, right? He's asking Bible League, can you help us with more materials for our kids? The answer is yeah. And Nick, as you say, often the only constraint is what? Financial. Once we meet the constraints of getting the materials and the Bibles, we can say what? Fire up the presses. Absolutely, Pastor Guerrero and many others. We want to meet that need. Jennifer or Jason, again, talk about seeing Bible League at work there in the Dzaleka Refugee Camp.
Yeah, so just like Nick mentioned, we learned that some of the churches running Bible League program are actually 42. There are over 100 churches at the camp formed by, the refugees themselves. So thankfully, Bible League is able to cater for 42 of those particular churches. And some of the programs running at the camp, at the Project Philip, there's also the Audio Bible Ministry running at the camp. There's the Discovery series for the children, the one that Nick just mentioned. And recently, there's Bible-based literacy that is on pilot right now. And the two pastors that were the first to be, trained for these Bible studies were Pastor Shaban and Guerrero. We got to meet both of them. So the two of them, after the knowledge and the inspiration they got from the Bible study training, Project Philip, they were inspired to set up their own churches. So Pastor Shaban has a church called Calvary chapel, and I actually was loving the names that they were naming these particular churches. And then Pastor Guerrero's church is called Bethlehem Church. I will let Jason talk more about the pastors, but one thing I'll say about Pastor Guerrero, since you mentioned him, I was really inspired by his story because Pastor Guerrero is actually married and he has 10 children. Amongst them, he adopted some. So on top of having a church, he's also set up an orphanage, to cater for the many children that don't have parents. And I was really touched by his story because I'm thinking to myself, he was the one telling us how hard it is for him to feed himself, leave alone his big family. But he still had the heart to take in children that were, fatherless, motherless. That just speaks to the kind of heart that these refugees have. Let Jason continue.
Pastor Guerrero, he has a heart for his people, and he did not want to end up in the refugee camp. He's a Congolese, but during the middle of the night, during an attack, someone put a knife to his throat, and they demanded money, and he gave him the very last bit of savings that he had. And he knew they would come back, and he said, if we do not leave here, he's like, I will lose my life, and my family will be displaced. So they came to this camp not on their own volition, but to escape true violence and true insecurity. But he is a very influential leader, and he's able to manage a lot of ministries. He's a high-capacity person that just wants to see the gospel taken to the fellow refugees, but he has a big heart for children. Not only has he adopted children, as Jennifer said, but he started an orphanage where he's teaching other children the gospel and education and doing everything within his means. So to see people like that in such a place of need, using everything they can to help other people, it was truly inspiring.
Well, I love this. You're painting a picture for us of these dear saints that you encountered half a world away there in Malawi. These personal testimonies, fellow believers, they stick in our hearts and our memories. I'll let you continue. Are there maybe one or two other people you met that stay in your minds, in your hearts?
One of the things that we consistently heard from all of the pastors, and this was perhaps one of the more heart-wrenching parts of the conversation, was just the hunger that they experience every single day. The diet for most of the people in the camp is ground maize mixed with some water once a day. Very occasionally they'll have some vegetables, but really that's it. It kind of looks a little bit like mashed potatoes, and that's really what they're surviving on. And the conversations with the pastors, they weren't complaining. They did such an amazing job. But what they were talking about was the fact that they're traveling around the camp, walking long distances, preaching, teaching, working with the children, but the entire time they're feeling hungry. And that was one of the really heart-wrenching things that we would love to have been able to do something about, but we couldn't.
Another person that really sticks out in my mind is a woman named Adela. She's a 39-year-old widow, and she has 7 children and now 1 grandchild. And she was a Christian before, but when she came to Dzaleka, she obviously had no Bible. They left in the middle of the night. Her husband was attacked and killed, and her and her children somehow made it to Burundi, then Tanzania, and then Malawi, just by traveling along the road, looking for a place to stay. And her resilience and her faith in God is truly inspiring. We're going to release a video on her story soon, so you will see that. It's called Adela's Story. And she now has gone through a Project Philip Bible study and has a Bible of her own. So her and her children, they read the Bible together, they worship together, and she's also leading a women's group. And so the Bible has given her hope, and she has gone through so much, but her faith in God has sustained her, and her thankfulness for just having a copy of her own Bible is something we have not seen in such a long time.
I love that.
I am remembering the story of Nazo. So she's a grandmother and a mother of 8. So one of the things that I loved about Nazo, she's actually illiterate. She never went to school, but she's so passionate about the work of God. And her grandchildren who went to some sort of school at least can speak Swahili, and she relies on them to read the Bible for her. So like the rest of the women, she fled the DR Congo after her husband was also killed, and she had to, run for security, where she found herself in Malawi at this particular camp. And one of the things that struck me about all these widows, because most of them are widows, as a woman, I could really empathize when I saw the impact of them losing their husbands and the impact it has on them as women, and having to cater for their families without, the backbone of their husbands. That really struck a chord with me. And I remember her sharing with me the way she misses the comfort of her home, her husband, who she called the pillar of her house. But nevertheless, she did go through Project Philip Bible Studies, and given she can't quite read, she was relying on listening to the Swahili preachings for her to be able to understand what the preacher was preaching. And then when she needed to dissect what the Bible says, then she was relying on her grandkids. And one of the things that has impacted Amnazo, after the Bible study, she started going around the camp. Let's not forget, most of them don't have so much to do. So she spends her free time walking around the camp evangelizing. So as a result of that, because she has a very pleasant personality, she has been nicknamed a woman of good news. Every time people see her, they believe she's bringing good news to them, which I think is a very amazing thing for a camp where there's really not much hope. So, and the other thing that touched me about her, she really was impacted by Bible League ministry, and stated that she appreciated Bible League for remembering the widows who are often forgotten. So that also was quite amazing to hear. So her story was impactful, and she attends the women Bible studies. And the other thing she told me is that she spends her time advising the younger women on how to live their lives and live for God.
Well, I love that. Love how you've introduced us to some of these wonderful believers that you met there in Malawi. Tell us one or more ways that we can be praying for fellow believers there, the Christian community in Malawi, and the work of Bible League.
I think for me, I can just say to pray for the orphans. We met, there's a lot of orphans at the camp, a lot of children who trekked their way to the Malawi refugee camp. So let's remember those orphans, not only that they may find God, but also that the Lord will be their protector and provide for them, and also to remember the widows that have a heavy responsibility of caring for their young ones and trying to just survive everyday life, but also to share the gospel and the hope that they have found with the next generation.
Outside the camp, I would just say continue prayers for funding. I think that Malawi is fertile ground for the gospel, and people are hungry to engage in their faith. They want to have a Bible, and Islam is creeping in. And I think if we do not take this opportunity to make sure that pastors and churches are equipped to evangelize, to study the Bible, and to provide people with Bibles, it could be a pivotal moment for this country. But right now, as it stands, there's a huge open door for the gospel in Malawi.
We talked earlier about Pastor Guerrero. One of the most unusual things that I was, again, very surprised about was the church that he's planted within the camp has actually started to attract people from outside the camp, native Malawians, and that was a surprise to me. And they are really growing a ministry which is starting to have an effect in the town in which the camp is based. And it would just be great to lift him up. He's a great guy with a great fruitful ministry where the Lord is really at work.
Well, I love how, in the midst of, a lot of tragedy you've talked about today, there's this podcast and the story, the Dzaleka Refugee Camp, is filled with a lot of hope, isn't there? And again, the three of you have had a great opportunity to travel and see that. And then again, to paint pictures in our minds of that. As we wrap up, I'm thinking of our listeners, those men, women, those children, those families, those churches, those organizations and foundations who have a heart for ministry on the continent of Africa and specifically in Malawi. Are there prayers and gifts of support making a difference there?
Well, one example I can give, which for me was so clear, is that when it came time to give out Bibles, the Bible presentation, it is hard to describe the joy. We were with a group of women who were receiving their first Bibles, and they were dancing around the room with crazy excitement over receiving their first Bibles. It was just such a fun time, and it really spoke to their newfound passion for Jesus. And obviously that's just one example of many, many other similar events, but really people are coming to know the Lord. Their lives really are being changed, and they're finding hope in the most desperate situation. And so these gifts are making a huge difference in Malawi.
Yeah, without the Bibles that some of the people we've talked about, like Adela, I don't know where their children would be if they'd be following the Lord. I don't know if Adela would have the hope that she does in Christ. These Bibles are treasured, and they're making a difference, and there's a huge interest in having one for those that don't yet.
Yeah, I love that. Jennifer, I'll give you the final word.
Yes, my word is to the donors. I would want to assure them that their generosity is touching lives and remembering the forgotten, and also to assure them that through God's word, you're comforting and helping the refugees find hope at the camp. Thank you.
Jennifer, Jason, and Nick, thank you for those words of encouragement for our listeners as we wrap up today's podcast. I loved hearing about all that you witnessed at the Dzaleka Refugee Camp in Malawi, Africa, a place with plenty of challenges and hardships, but truly impacted by the hope of the gospel. Let's be both thankful for all that God is doing there and be praying for the Christian community and the ministry of Bible League there in East Africa. Friends, thank you for tuning in and for supporting Bible League International with your prayers and financial gifts in this final month of 2025. Will you follow Bible League on social media? You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. And you can sign up for our e-newsletter and Verse of the Day and learn more about becoming a monthly sower at BibleLeague.org. That's BibleLeague.org. And let us know how today's program impacted you. Email us at podcast@BibleLeague.org. I'm Michael Woolworth for the Word in Action podcast. Thanks for listening.